It's always a pleasure to welcome General Phil Breedlove to the Cipher Brief studio, especially on a day like today, sir. We really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. You are someone who has really advocated the case for Ukraine to defend itself since Russia invaded Crimea the first time in 2014. You're a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. You understand what is happening with Russia better than most. So what was your reaction as you saw this conversation unfold in the Oval Office today between President Trump and President Zelensky?
So, first of all, thanks for having me back, Suzanne. I enjoy your platform, and it's one of the better ones out there. So, yeah, today was a horrible disappointment and just almost a shock to the system. I don't like to do politics, so let me just say it this way. I think there was only one winner today, and that is Vladimir Putin. He has to be absolutely happy with what he saw today and how his plan to drag the U.S. out of NATO and separate NATO and Ukraine from the United States. And I think today was a big day for Mr. Putin.
I think it's, one of the things that I realize, and I'm like you, I don't like to get political. I think that President Trump has some great ideas that a lot of people support and believe in. The way in which he's doing them, though, are really causing some confusion. But the relationship between him and the Russian president has been perplexing. He gave a little hint today during this conversation. I'm not sure if you heard it, but he interrupted President Zelensky when he was trying to once again communicate what President Putin has done to his country, the death, the murder, the war, the destruction that he has brought. And he kept getting interrupted by the president. And the president said, "Let me tell you," and this is a quote, "Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia, Russia, Russia." Well, I think people can understand how the president feels like he was the victim of a political campaign. Making that jump to support and to feel this bond with the Russian president who, has targeted America, has targeted Europe. How dangerous is this mindset?
Well, if I could add one layer of complexity to what you just brought up, which is all relevant. If you look at the last 2 weeks leading into this culmination point tonight or this afternoon, and you look at what our president has been trying to do, some of that is very noble. I mean, he wants to stop killing. There's lots of things that he wants to do, and he intimates that he's working this big deal. But if you pay attention to what the two sides are saying in the public, on the Russian side, they are talking about none of this is acceptable to us. We won't accept this. We won't accept that. All the things that the West or the United States are bringing up, they have been adamant, not only Putin, but his Lavrov and other close-in mouthpieces. They've been adamant that they're not going to accept any of these conditions. In fact, they have just very recently intimated that not only would they not accept it, but they expect us in the deal to give them land that they never conquered. And so it's really hard to understand that when we watch what Mr. Putin and his people are doing in the public, on the record, out there in the open, what they're saying, and then all we hear from our side of the negotiation is the things that Ukraine is going to have to give up. Remember, Russia is the aggressor. Don't be fooled by any of this hullabaloo out there in the news. Russia is and was and has been the aggressor. And Ukraine is the aggrieved nation. And how would we have a conversation whereby the aggressor gets everything and the aggrieved nation has to sacrifice? I don't know how those kind of conversations work in the closed doors of the Oval Office before they came out to have this press conference. I don't know how that all went, but it had to be a really tough conversation.
I think we would all like to kind of just have a little bit more information and insight into the context around how all of this is unfolded. But it's very interesting to me that the one thing that has been missing from the descriptions that President Trump has made about President Putin is that he is a threat at all to the United States. You would think that this is just simply a deal, that there has been no national security threat. How do you feel about that, given what you saw when you were at NATO and what you continue to see since you've been to Ukraine multiple times since the full-scale invasion?
Well, as you know, we have identified formally Russia as a threat. We are a part of NATO. NATO's last document, DDA they call it, labels Russia as a threat. So we in the United States have signed up to that. It would have never gone into the document had we not. We know that Mr. Putin is a threat. What we are trying to do, as you know, is focus on the horizon and keep our eyes on China. This also is a noble effort. But Clausewitz was quick to tell us that the enemy gets a vote. And right now, Mr. Putin is voting for war. There is war in Europe, and the war is burning on our toes while we are gazing into the distance. And I think that we need to be maybe a little more realistic in where we put our efforts. Now, the administration, I think, would tell you, we're trying to stop the killing. Mm-hmm. I think the real question to ask those involved is, at what cost? Do we capitulate to Mr. Putin and give them everything that Russia says they're demanding? And do we ask the aggrieved nation to give everything up? That's the questions I think we need to be asking ourselves.
Recognizing excellence in national security, the Cipher Brief Honors Dinner celebrates those who've made a real difference in protecting our nation. It's an unforgettable evening with top leaders in the field. Join us in honoring these remarkable contributions. Reserve your seat now at cipherbriefhonors.com.
So what about this friendship without limits between China and Russia? If the Russian president feels like he has the ability to influence or has a bond with the American president, how is China looking at this as an opportunity?
Well, I don't want to sound glib. I belong to that group that believe that China sees Russia as a useful little brother. Mm-hmm. And just in the last couple of days, several pundits, and at least one of good reputation, have talked about we need to be careful about China fostering this little brother association to their gain as far as what they can get from Russia in this. An example, of course, is when Russia needed a friend back in the 2014-2015 timeline, Russia cut a huge oil deal with China to make the world say, look, they're cooperating. And China is enjoying some very, let me say it one more time, very cheap petroleum products based on Russia's drastic need to have a friend in front of the world back then. So I think we need to be careful that we don't allow, I don't see this as big a problem as two militaries ganging up on the world. I see this as China being more and more empowered to do things it wants to do, and Russia needing China so badly, it will give China a chance to advantage themselves.
I think some Americans may be forgetting the fact that Russia and China have both burrowed their way into U.S. critical infrastructure. There has been IP theft, more on behalf of China. There have been criminal activities that have been associated through multiple administrations attributed to Russia and to China. Don't you think that, and here I'm asking you now to be the president, but don't you think that should be part of any deal that's struck in Ukraine? Something that goes beyond what Russia has done only in that country to what they're actually doing by targeting Americans today?
Well, the obvious answer is yes. Again, we don't know what's happened in the back rooms of these conversations to this point. Mr. Trump says he's had a conversation with Putin. Mr. Putin says he never had that conversation. There is a lot of was here that's going to have to get worked out. But I think that when we sit down to deal with Russia, it needs to be in a holistic manner, looking at all the bad behavior that they've had over time. The invasion of Georgia in '08, the invasion of the Crimea and the Donbass in 13, 14, 15, and now the invasion of the rest of Ukraine in these last 3 years. We need to be holistic in looking back at the bad behavior of an aggressor nation and the leader that cultivates that behavior. And then we will be able to take a real view of what's going on.
Okay, let's look forward here in our final question. Really, you are President Zelensky. You're leaving the White House without the deal you thought you were going to be getting when you arrived. You're actually more wounded now than you were when you arrived. What is next for you? What are the practical pathways for him to push forward where it won't make this worse?
Yeah, well, this is the, you say the $64,000 question. Yeah. Let's just say now it's the $64 million question. President Zelensky is a proud man who has probably slept less than any human being on the planet for the last 11 years. And his country is fighting for its life by itself, as far as manpower, against a world superpower who has decided that it will amass its army, march across internationally recognized borders, and invade the nations that surround it. And so Mr. Zelensky's in a tough place, but part of that will have to be possibly eating a little crow along the way. I was disappointed in the whole thing about you should just say thank you. How many times has Zelensky said thank you? I think we should put some of our students on a counter and find out, but it's dozens and dozens of times publicly Mr. Zelensky has said thank you. I don't know where that whole conversation started, but the fact of the matter is Mr. Zelensky needs Europe. And as you know, in the past, in this war, Europe has contributed more to Ukraine than America has. That is a fact now that's out there. He needs Europe, but he also needs America. And Europe, some of Europe, is loath to act without America. And so we are a linchpin, and he's going to have to find his way to sit back down with the President of the United States, hopefully next time in a more private setting, and work things out to a degree that they can then show some unity in front of the world. And while it's important for the world to see unity, the most important thing is for Mr. Putin to understand that the important elements of the West are not going to allow him to continue running over the top of his neighbor nations. He needs to hear that loud and clear by what he sees publicly, that we're not going to tolerate it.
Well, if we thought things were difficult for President Zelensky before, I think they just got much harder today. It will be interesting. As you've mentioned, the Ukrainians are very resilient, very strong people. It will be interesting to see how they come out of this. General Phil Breedlove, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, we want to thank you so much for taking time today to help us put some context and some common sense around what we saw today. Thank you.
Great to talk to you.